Welcome back to this course on blockchain and its applications. So, in the last lecture, we have debated, or rather we have become the devil's advocate to critically analyze whether we can utilize blockchain for maintaining the land registry record, and we have seen that there are multiple pros and cons that we need to think of while designing an end-to-end solution. So, today we are going to be a little bit favorable towards the design of blockchain. We are going to learn a potential use case, or rather a set of potential use cases of blockchain in the financial sector, where people have done pilot implementation and they have tried to see that whether blockchain can solve the problems that are associated with this particular use case, and what are the kind of optimized way of implementing a blockchain based solution. So, in this context we are going to learn about the potential blockchain use cases in financial services, and these are the set of concepts which we are going to cover today. We are particularly going to highlight on cross border payments over blockchain, and we are going to talk about one practical pilot project that have been taken up by the Singapore government, that is called the project UBIN. So, we are going to learn about the different phases of project UBIN and how the project UBIN has been implemented to support financial services on top of a blockchain based distributed ledger technology. So, these are the keywords for today's talk. We are going to learn about this Stellar protocol and network as well as the Ripple protocol and network. So, these are the two protocols which have been widely designed and used for supporting cryptocurrencies for cross border trading, and then we are going to talk about this project UBIN. Now, coming to this problem of cross border payment, so this cross border payment was the classic use case for which Bitcoin was created, so that you can do payments, or you can do trading across different continents, different countries, different zones without having any control of the government or any control of the banks or any intermediaries. Well, and this idea that well, you can do the trading without the explicit control of anyone else, that made this idea of blockchain much more popular, and from there many other cryptocurrencies have been invented. Well, and till now we have over 6,000 such cryptocurrencies, not only the Bitcoin. So, although Bitcoin was something which was very popular, but now we have many other such cryptocurrencies that support different properties. Now, when there are so many cryptocurrencies, there are about more than 6,000 cryptocurrencies, obviously a question comes that what qualifies as a currency? Well, now if I just try to look into the definition from the economics, it says that for some particular token to be recognized as a currency, this set of criteria must be satisfied. The first thing is that you need to have a medium of exchange, whether the merchants are willing to accept the currency in exchange for goods and services. Well, so that is one primary requirement. The second requirement is the unit of account. So, we need to think of whether is it a measure of the real value of goods and services. Say for example, whether would a merchant be willing to accept the same value regardless of the relative currency fluctuations. Well, and the third is the store of values. Well, like you can have a mode of investment on that particular token. So, if these three properties are satisfied, then we call it as a currency, and typically the different cryptocurrencies that have been invested, that have been designed in the market, they try to follow, they try to satisfy these three primary criteria, so that this particular currency can be utilized for trading goods and services among different merchants or individual buyers and sellers. So, it can be used in a B2B network, it can be used to a B2C network and so on. So, that way as I mentioned that there are different currencies that have been evolved over time, and out of them today in this lecture I am going to touch upon two of such prominent cryptocurrencies which are primarily designed for such cross border trading. while overcoming some of the limitations of Bitcoin, like that require huge computation power and so on. And from that aspect, we are going to touch upon on those two currencies which are even pretty much popular nowadays. So they are called the Stellar and the Ripple. So these two particular cryptocurrency and the corresponding network. So first, let us try to discuss about the Stellar protocol and network. So the Stellar is a decentralized hybrid blockchain platform with open membership. It was launched in 2014 and it uses this Lumens as the native asset. So Lumens is the unit or the coin that is being transferred in the Stellar network for exchanging the goods and services. So the Stellar uses a concept of Federated Byzantine Agreement or FBA, which is the underlying consensus protocol. So I am going to touch upon that consensus protocol very briefly in the next slide. So this Federated Byzantine Agreement or FBA, in that particular consensus protocol, so the quorums are formed based on participants' individual trust decisions. So it is something like that. I can see that there are multiple different informations and both of the informations or all of the informations are correct. So my preference will go to one of the information, and based on that I would form of a quorum, and then this individual quorum try to see that where majority of the participants are participating. So which is the largest quorum, based on them gradually the system tends to move towards consensus. Well, so we basically set up an agreement among those quorums. So this particular consensus protocol, which is widely known as the Stellar consensus protocol, and that protocol got published in SOSP, a prominent conference in the operating system domain. Now with this Stellar consensus algorithm, it is again highly scalable. It takes around 2 to 5 seconds to clear a transaction. So in the Stellar network, we use something called the anchors, which act as bridges between a given currency and the Stellar network. So the task of the anchors are basically to make exchanges, like say for example, you want to trade using INR over the Stellar network. So with respect to INR, you need to get the lumens and participate in the business. So that transaction is basically done by these anchors, and as a consequence, it has a distributed exchange. So in that distributed exchange, you can pay in euro with INR balance in your wallet, and the network will automatically convert it at the lowest rate for you. Okay, so on that distributed exchange network. So here is the link for this Stellar network. You can actually go to the corresponding website to get an idea about the Stellar network. So broadly, the Stellar network, it provides a platform for this kind of cross currency exchange. So it is a kind of open network, as I mentioned, that anyone can participate, anyone can join in the network and then participate in the cross border payment. So you can browse through this site, you can find out that the different transactions that is happening on this Stellar network, and consequently there are multiple documents which are also available. So you can go to this Learn tab, and there you can actually try to understand, try to get an idea about what is Stellar, how this Stellar network is designed, and what are the individual components in the Stellar network. So I would suggest all of you to browse through this website to get an understanding about the Stellar network. Now in this particular context, as I mentioned, that Stellar uses this Federated Byzantine Agreement as the underlying consensus algorithm, and this idea got published in a SOSP 2019 paper, and this is the title of the paper: Fast and Secure Global Payments with Stellar. This article you can also look into to understand the internals about the consensus protocol of Stellar. So as I mentioned, that it uses that Federated Byzantine Agreement, and in that Federated Byzantine Agreement, one of the interesting idea that it uses, it is called the federated voting. So what is federated voting? So in federated voting, nodes try to agree on abstract statements by first voting, then accepting and finally confirming statements. So, that means while they are doing the voting, they follow multiple quorums and finally there is an agreement among the quorums. So, the nodes they keep on voting any valid statement. So, remember they can vote any valid statement that the nodes believe to be valid. Then it accepts when a majority votes for that statement. So, that way it form a quorum and the statement is confirmed when the quorum unanimously accept the statement. So, here is an example about how the quorums are being formed in a stellar network. So, assume that this is a stellar network and I have these different nodes, that is 4 plus 3 is 7 nodes in this network. So, to end, so here one node starts with voting x and another node starts with voting y and that way the information gets propagated. So, a part of the node they vote x and another part of the node they vote y. So, here you can see that the network has been partitioned. So, a part of the network they are voting x, a part of the network that is voting y. So, basically there are two quorums that have been formed. One quorum is on these 4 nodes, another quorum is on the 3 nodes and at this stage the individual node starts to accept a particular statement when they see that their neighbors have also accepted that statement. So, in that context say some node starts accepting x, so whenever they see that majority of the nodes have start accepting x and in the other quorum, that means in the green quorum, when we see that well in the red, that is a larger quorum where the nodes have started accepting x, they also start accepting x. Okay. So, this information gets propagated to the other quorum and eventually all the members in the network or the majority of the members in the network, they accept on a single statement. That means they basically come to an agreement among the quorums to finally accept x. So, that way the information gets propagated in this Federated Byzantine Agreement Protocol and this Federated Byzantine Agreement Protocol is actually a very interesting protocol that runs Byzantine agreement in an open network. So, in an open network, as I mentioned earlier, it is difficult for all people to know each other. So, because it is difficult for all people to know each other, so that way they form these individual quorums that I might know few of my neighbors. So, I try to form a quorum among my neighbors and that way the quorum gradually get increased and eventually it happens that multiple quorums can start interacting with each other and eventually they actually agree on a particular view of the system. Well, so that is the core idea behind this federated voting. So, if you want to know more details about this federated voting, I would suggest you to look into the SOSP paper that gives the internal technical details and the formal proofs of that federated voting idea, which is used in the Stellar Consensus Protocol. Now, if you just think about the Stellar Protocol and the network, the safety and the liveness property. So, Stellar works with a partially synchronous assumption. Again, we are bound by the FLP impossibility theorem here. We cannot support safety and liveness together on a asynchronous environment. So, what Stellar ensures that it ensures safety under asynchronous assumption. So, where the liveness in Stellar it requires a synchronous network. So, whenever Stellar finds out that the network is synchronous, it moves from current view to the next view. So, that way the protocol make progress in the system. Now, if I just try to look into the performance of Stellar, you will see that this x axis shows the transactions per second and the y axis shown the latency. So, you see that with different component in the Stellar protocol like the ledger update, balloting and the nomination. So, let us focus on that ledger update part, which is actually the time that it takes to update a transaction in the ledger. So, here you will see that with around 350 transactions per second, the transaction latency is something near to 1000 seconds, 1000 milliseconds. That means it is around 1 second. So, within 1 second I can support around 350 transactions per second. So, that is obviously way more compared to Bitcoin and obviously it is not as close as Visa or PayPal, but still it provides a much more scalable way of supporting consensus in a decentralized network. Now, let us try to highlight on the second protocol for cross border payment, that is the Ripple protocol and the Ripple network. So, Ripple was the protocol for the banks to clear and settle payments in real time through a distributed network. So, Ripple was something that intended to replace RTGS. So, RTGS, I think many of you know it, the real time gross payment. So, it is basically to settle the payments, settle the large valued payments among different banks. So, Ripple uses a consensus mechanism which is called XRPL, XRP ledger. XRP is the default currency for Ripple. It allows the payment exchange and remittance to happen without need for a centralized clearing house. Well, so typically RTGS involve a central bank of a countries, like for India the RTGS happens to the Reserve Bank. While I will discuss about project UBIN, I will come to that specific points about this consensus about this RTGS and how the settlement is being done. But broadly you can think of that, well, you need a central bank like a Reserve Bank which will done that settlement, and what Ripple does, Ripple helps in doing that settlement without the involvement of any centralized clearing house. So, it takes on average 5 seconds for confirmation. It does not have any mining, it uses a custom protocol, but the interesting fact is that this custom protocol, that means the XRPL, it has not been validated for correctness and fault tolerance. Well, and Ripple also have some gateway nodes. So, these gateway nodes convert the fiat currency means the government provided currencies, to XRP. So, XRP, as I mentioned, that it is the currency in Ripple. Then market makers convert from one currency to another over the Ripple network. Ripple has a centralized governance, but because you can actually see that what transactions are going on over the Ripple network, and Ripple still holds a large fraction of the cryptocurrency. So, you can go to this website ripple.com to see the Ripple network and different properties that is being supported over the Ripple network. So, here also, just like I have shown you for the Stellar, you can browse through this website to understand that what are the different features that are being provided by Ripple, and here also you can have under resources different blogs and different materials which actually talks about these internals of Ripples. Well, so you can go to this RippleNet to understand that what the network is and how to join the network, what are the things that you can do over that network and so on. So, as I mentioned that one of the important aspect of Ripple is that the correctness has not been proved or correctness has not been validated. Indeed, there is a paper, research paper, like the title of the paper is Analysis of the XRP Ledger Consensus Protocol, which actually shows that XRPL violates safety and liveness. Indeed, if you just browse over the internet, you will see that there are lots of debates about the correctness of the Ripple consensus, and people are not fully convinced whether Ripple provide necessary safety and liveness in its end-to-end transaction. Now, these are the kind of two prominent network which are developed to support such kind of cross-border payment. And now I am going to talk about this project UBIN. So, this project UBIN is a multi-year, multi-institute project that have been taken up by the Singapore government. Basically, this Monetary Authority of Singapore, or MAS. So, MAS is something you can think of it as the central agency, just like our Reserve Bank, which govern the monetary principles and the regulations in Singapore. So, MAS along with different other participating enterprises and industries and governing bodies, they had taken this project UBIN. So, the idea of this project UBIN was that to enable interbank transfer on top of the distributed ledger, to support Singapore dollar on top of a distributed ledger. So, as I mentioned that it is a collaborative project with the industry to explore the use of blockchain and distributed ledger technology for clearing and settlement of payments and securities. Securities means the goods and the services that you are going to get with respect to certain payments, that means during your trades. So, this was taken up by the MAS in November 2016 and it concluded around the end of 2020 just at the end of last year. In the MAS website, the detailed reports are available. So, you can browse through this detailed report to get an idea how that entire end-to-end architecture have been taken up and what are the things that MAS along with other industries they have explored to support the cross-border payment on top of a DLT based platform. So, this project UBIN was a 5-phase project. There was from phase 1 to phase 5. Individual phase had different names. Phase 1 was named as tokenized SGD, then phase 2 was reimagining RTGS, phase 3 was delivery versus payment or DVP, phase 4 was cross border payment versus payment BVP, and phase 5 was enabling broad ecosystem collaboration on top of DLT. So, let us try to see the highlights of these individual phases of the project UBIN. So, phase 1 was tokenized SGD. MAS it formed a consortium of financial institution to conduct interbank payments using the blockchain technology, and these are the set of different organizations which had participated in phase 1 of project UBIN: Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Credit Suisse, DBS Bank, HSBC, JP Morgan, Mitsubishi UFJ, OCBC, R3, Singapore Exchange or SGX, United Overseas Bank. So, these are the organization collectively with MAS they try to export or explore whether DLT can be used for managing the interbank payments and interbank securities. It include the DLT based payment in MEPS. So, MEPS is Singapore's central bank's payment system. So, the full form is Mass Electronic Payment System, MEPS. So, typically in MEPS what happens that for interbank transfer, the participant banks they pledge cash into a custody account held at MAS. Well, so this is the custody account or this is the kind of reserve account in MAS. So, what MAS does that depending on the interbank transfer, there is no physical fund transfer, but what they do they keep on updating the individual bank's account that this much amount has been transferred from this account to this bank to that bank. Well, so that way they just maintain the registry rather than doing any kind of physical money transfer, and indeed in RTGS, so same kind of things happen. So, in your RTGS you have a central authority or you have a kind of central bank kind of system. So, in RTGS you have this central bank. So, the central bank maintains a reserve account for individual banks, say B1, B2 like this. Now, I have individual banks say B1 and B2. Now, say one of you want to make a transfer from bank 1 to bank 2. Okay. Now, whenever you are going to make a transfer from bank 1 to bank 2, so this need to be a kind of huge money, a large sum of money. For small money transfer, you cannot use RTGS. For that, you have to use NEFT or other things. For large money transfer, say assume that you want to transfer some 2 lakh. You want to transfer raise 2 lakh from bank 1 to bank 2. Now, whenever you are going to transfer this amount from bank 1 to bank 2, what happens that bank 1 just send that information to the central bank, and then central bank it deduct raise 2 lakh from the reserve account of bank B1 and add it up to the reserve account of bank B2. So, for bank B1 it deduct raise 2 lakh, and from bank B2 it add raise 2 lakh, and that way the amount is being transferred from B1 to B2. So, there is no physical money transfer that is happening here. It is just like the updating of the record. Well, and the central bank is going to manage that. So, these things in Singapore, the RTGS system, the equivalent RTGS equivalent system in Singapore, that is called this MEPS plus, Mass Electronic Payment System plus. So, there for this interbank transfer, the individual banks, they contact the MAS and must update their records in this particular way. So, that is the kind of broad idea in this interbank payment methodology, and what happens in turn that this project UBIN actually focused on digitizing this transfer over the distributed ledger technology, so that individual bank can directly do the transfer from themselves without waiting for the MAS to settle the payment. Well, so it is something like that whenever you have this bank A system. So, whenever you are making such kind of transfer on bank A system, that information is automatically updated in DLT that is being maintained in project UBIN, and the amount is getting transferred from bank A to bank B, and the information is also readily available to MAS. Well, so you do not need to go through this RTGS system anymore. So, the RTGS system, the legacy RTGS system was also interconnected over this DLT connector. If you do not want to use this project UBIN or DLT, you can use the traditional RTGS system. The central bank will do that settlement, but otherwise if you use the distributed ledger technology, immediately the information will get updated to all the participating banks. So, that was the kind of core idea in the phase 1 of project UBIN. Now, in phase 2, it tries to solve one of the important problem in RTGS, which typically happens, and that is known as gridlock. So, this phase 2 of project UBIN, it was led by MAS and Association of Banks in Singapore, or ABS. So, it developed a proof of concept architecture of supporting DLT based RTGS, or rather MEPS plus, using 3 DLT platforms, Ethereum, Fabric and R3 Corda. The project had been open source. So, the link is given, you can go there and you can browse the project. So, as I mentioned, it solved a typical problem in gridlock. So, what is this gridlock problem? So, gridlock problem is that, so assume that 3 parties in individual banks, they are doing the transaction in this way, that from bank 1, there is a transfer of $100K from bank 2, then from bank 2, there is a $130K transfer to bank 3, and from bank 3 there is a $50K transfer to bank 1. Now, if you just think about the individual assets available with individual bank, bank 1 had $50K, bank 2 had $100K and bank 3 had $20K. Now, here you can see with this balance which is available with these individual banks, you cannot do these transactions. You cannot do transaction of $100K from bank 1 to bank 2 because bank 1 had $50K. You cannot transfer $130K from bank 2 to bank 3 because bank 2 had $100. You cannot transfer $50K from bank 3 to bank 1 because bank 3 had $20K. But if you just try to do a net transfer, you will see that this net transfer is successful. The net transfer can be succeed, because if you just eventually think of that, well, bank 1 is going to transfer 100K and bank 1 will maintain a balance of $50K once they are transferring this 100K. Then bank 2, the balance of bank 2 becomes 200K, and then bank 2 transfer 130K. So, the bank 2's balance becomes 70K and this 130K gets added to bank 3. So, the balance at bank 3 becomes 150K. Now, in this bank 3 can transfer 50K. So, effective balance becomes 100K, and this 50K can get added up to bank 1, and bank 1 had negative 50K balance. So, this 50K gets added up and the effective balance becomes 0 for bank 1. Well, so if I just try to think about the net transfer, assume that the negative balance is possible, then these transfers can be done. Well, so what the phase 2 of project UBIN does, project UBIN tries to realize that on top of a DLT platform, and this is the kind of architecture which is being done there, the effective things that I have just shown you, that this effective transfer of 50k from bank 1 to bank 3 happens, and 30k from bank 2 to bank 3 happens by computing the net of these transfers, these 3 transfers, and that way the transfers become successful. And that way it solves the particular gridlock problem which can happen in large scale RTGS transfer. And then comes the phase 3 of project UBIN. It uses this delivery versus payment. So, the delivery versus payment or DVP, in summary, it means that the cash payment for a purchase security occurs prior to or upon its delivery. That means, whenever I am trading with you, you are going to deliver whatever I have purchased, and then only I am going to transfer the money. So, this confirmation that this delivery of the good followed by the delivery of the money, this need to be atomic, and that is being supported by the phase 3 of project UBIN. So, the two counterparties or the traders meet at an agreed time to exchange the agreed assets. So, in this phase, MAS and SGX, they collaborated to realize domestic DVP settlement on 2 separate blockchain platforms. So, what they did, this is a kind of broad architecture of the system. So, you had a cash ledger between the buyer and seller, which handled the cash transfer from buyer to the seller, and then a securities ledger which maintains the goods transfer from the seller to the buyer. And then this 2 network has been implemented with 3 different platforms, like in prototype 1 Quorum was for cash ledger and Anquan permission blockchain for security ledger. For prototype 2 Ethereum was cash ledger, Hyperledger Fabric as the security ledger. In prototype 3 Hyperledger Fabric as the cash ledger, and Chainlink as the security ledger. So, they developed 3 different such prototype for doing these atomic transactions for DVP payments. Then phase 4 was focused on this cross border payment. So, it was a joint initiative by the Bank of Canada, Bank of England and MAS. It was initiated in November 2018. So, it supported the transparency in payment status, availability of cross border payment services, reduced time for payment processing with reduced cost. It considered 3 different payment models and analyzed their respective impact and scale. And here I am just trying to highlight on the model 2. In model 2, here you see that individual countries, they maintain 3 different currencies, and I have multiple banks for individual 3 countries. So, here are the 3 countries and individual banks for the 3 countries, and they maintain different currencies. Now, I am going to transfer using one currency to another currency, and this information is getting transferred over the traditional RTGS. Now, when they are going to get over traditional RTGS, what can happen? The central bank at these different countries, that central bank at country A, at country B and country C, they have to ensure that the total currency, the total balance that is getting in the outflow and in the inflow domain. So, that they have to maintain, and this maintenance of that information, that can be put forward on top of a blockchain. So, that individual central banks of different countries, they can collaborate with each other, and without the help of any global bank or something like that, which can make that coordination. Now, in traditional phase, this is time consuming, because individual bank need to transfer the proof manually, and that proof need to be verified, and then only the transfer happens. But with the help of a DLT based platform, this can be initiated rapidly without involving any third party. Then finally, in phase 5, it enables a broad ecosystem collaboration. That means adds up additional services on top of this payment network. So, it provides technical insight into the blockchain based multi-currency payment network prototype that was built. It describes how the network could benefit the financial industry and blockchain ecosystem. So, in summary, this project UBIN, it developed this multi-currency blockchain based payment network, and there are multiple services can take help of this payment network, as you can see. So, at the end users, you can have different wallets that contains the end user information, then you can support this cross border currency exchange with different currencies like USD or Singapore dollar, and that can be supported by different applications like invoice financing, trade finance, supply chain, trade, property titles, capital markets, SGX, bonds and so on. Well, so different industries can be connected all together with this multi-currency blockchain based payment network. So, basically with the help of blockchain, project UBIN had tried to realize a multi-currency network in a simple way, which was otherwise much more complicated in India practical implementation. So here is a kind of example that how this multi-currency network work. So you can use this B2P network. So that was developed by Digital Venture. It is called a blockchain for procure to pay network. It does this automated document verification and payment processing. Now assume that the buyer is in Thailand and the seller is at Singapore. Now whenever they are exporting goods and submitting the necessary document to this B2P network, so this B2P network can directly connect to the UBIN payment network to transfer the money from Thai buyer's wallet to the Singapore seller's wallet. Well, so as and when the goods will be exported and the thing will be reported on the B2P network, immediately the payment can be settled on the UBIN network. So that way, by making interoperability among multiple blockchain, you can make the entire end-to-end life easier. So in summary, what we have seen that financial services have been one of the key use cases for blockchain, and we have broadly touched upon this project UBIN, which develops a multi-currency payment network. This project has been open sourced, and you can look into the project reports, the detailed reports in the different 5 phases of the project that does a nice study about comparing the financial services that can be developed on top of project UBIN, and at the same time the implementation sources are publicly available. You can also browse through those implementation source to look at how they have been actually achieved it. So that's all for this particular lecture, which highlights the financial use cases on top of blockchain. In the next lecture, we will discuss about another use case on top of blockchain. Thank you all. See you all in the next lecture.